Raveena Solkar's sudden disappearance, Karthik Veylan's obsessive past, Devraj Khanna's chilling lies, Maya Jindran's desperate search for truth, and Inspector Aarav Nandan's relentless pursuit of justice together form the spine of a story so dark that Bengaluru would never forget it. What began as an ordinary night unraveled into a nightmare that exposed how close danger can hide in plain sight. Raveena Solkar was the kind of woman who appeared to have everything under control. At 29, she had carved out a steady life in Bengaluru's sprawling tech industry. Her work days were long and stressful, but she balanced them with a structured routine: fitness classes in the evenings, grocery runs on weekends, and occasional outings with her close friend Maya Jindran. She lived alone in a modern apartment, one of the countless complexes that had sprung up to house the city's growing professional class. For neighbors, she was polite and reserved, rarely causing any disturbance. On the surface, Raveena's life seemed ordinary, even predictable. That is why her sudden disappearance felt like a crack in a mirror, an event so unexpected it unsettled everyone who knew her. It began on a humid Friday evening when the streets were buzzing with the chaos of the city. Raveena left her office later than usual, her final swipe card entry marking 8:17 p.m. Cameras at the entrance captured her stepping into an auto rickshaw, her handbag slung neatly across her shoulder. Her expression was calm, even tired, but not fearful. She was expected to be home in less than half an hour. Yet the hours passed, and there was no sign of her. At first, her absence raised no alarm. Perhaps she had gone out for dinner. Perhaps she had chosen to stay with a friend. But by midnight, when calls to her phone went unanswered, a subtle worry began to take root. The next morning, Maya noticed something unusual. Raveena's status on the office messaging system remained idle, and her phone still rang endlessly without response. By noon, Maya was convinced something was wrong. She filed a missing person report at the local police station, explaining that her friend was not the type to vanish without telling anyone. The police took the report, but did not treat it with urgency. In a city where young professionals often moved abruptly, cases like this were common. Many times they resolved themselves within a day or two. Still, Maya's unease lingered. She visited Raveena's apartment and found her front door locked from the outside. The lights inside were off, and her car remained parked in its usual spot in the basement. Mail lay untouched near the door. There was no sign of struggle, no broken lock, no scattered belongings. It was as if Raveena had simply never come home. Neighbors recalled nothing unusual. Some even assumed she had gone away for the weekend. When Inspector Aarav Nandan was assigned to review the case, he began with the basics. CCTV cameras near Raveena's workplace and residential complex were examined. The footage was disturbing in its simplicity. It showed her clearly entering an auto rickshaw after leaving her office, then nothing. The camera near her apartment gate never recorded her arrival. Somewhere between those 2 points, she had vanished. The auto rickshaw driver, traced a day later, insisted he had dropped her off near her building. His statement conflicted with the footage, but without evidence to prove otherwise, the investigation felt like chasing shadows. What unsettled the police most was how carefully the disappearance seemed to have unfolded. Raveena was not reckless with her safety. She avoided late-night travel, always informed Maya of her plans, and kept her family updated. For someone so cautious, to disappear without a trace was deeply unusual. Inspector Aarav sensed this was no ordinary missing case. As news of her absence spread, whispers began in the neighborhood. Some said it was a case of abduction, others suggested a personal conflict. Speculations grew wild because there were no answers. Her colleagues recalled how she had seemed distracted in recent weeks, as if carrying a private burden she never fully shared. One hinted that she had recently ended a relationship with a man who didn't take rejection kindly. Another remembered her mentioning strange phone calls that left her visibly shaken. By Sunday evening, the silence surrounding her disappearance became louder than any noise. Bengaluru, a city of relentless movement, had swallowed her whole. The familiar hum of her life, early morning gym visits, messages to friends, routine office logins, had abruptly gone silent, and in that silence, her absence began to feel less like an accident and more like the beginning of something far darker. The first cracks had appeared in the ordinary life of Raveena Solkar, and those cracks would soon widen into a nightmare that no one in her circle was prepared to face. Inspector Aarav Nandan was not new to missing person cases, but something about Raveena's disappearance unsettled him. The clean cut between the CCTV footage of her leaving the office and the absence of her arrival at the apartment suggested precision, as if someone had orchestrated her vanishing. To begin piecing the puzzle together, he delved into her personal life. What emerged was a web of hidden struggles behind her seemingly disciplined routine. Through colleagues and friends, Aarav learned about a man named Karthik Veylan, a former boyfriend with a reputation for being controlling. Their relationship had ended months earlier, but traces of conflict lingered. Raveena had once confided in Maya about threatening late-night calls, sometimes lasting until dawn. She had brushed it off as harassment she could handle, but her silence on the matter in recent weeks only raised more questions. Had Karthik finally acted on his obsession, or was his presence just an easy thread for investigators to pull? Aarav couldn't ignore the possibility. When Karthik was called in, his behavior left an odd impression. He appeared calm and cooperative, but his words carried a rehearsed quality, as if he had prepared himself for this moment. He insisted he had not seen Raveena in weeks, that their relationship was truly over, and he had moved. Phone records, however, hinted at a different story. His number had appeared on Raveena's call log multiple times in the month leading up to her disappearance. Some calls had gone unanswered. Others had lasted minutes. Though not enough to prove guilt, the pattern painted him as a figure unwilling to let go. Even so, a second thread soon complicated the case. Raveena's landlord, Devraj Khanna, came forward with a surprising claim. According to him, he had seen Raveena return home on the very night she vanished. He described spotting her walking up the stairs with her handbag, nodding politely before disappearing into her apartment. If true, this contradicted the CCTV footage that showed no sign of her entering the building. It also contradicted the rickshaw driver's testimony that he dropped her outside. Aarav immediately recognized this as a fracture in the narrative. Either Devraj was lying, or someone else was manipulating the timeline. To test Devraj's account, police checked the building's internal security cameras. The footage shocked. There was no recording of Raveena arriving at her apartment block that night. The landlord's words suddenly seemed unreliable, raising suspicion about his role in the mystery. Why would a man with no apparent connection to her personal life insert himself into the story with such confidence? And why provide a detail so easily disproved? Aarav began to wonder whether Devraj was covering for someone, or if his role was far darker than he let on. Meanwhile, Maya's memories added another layer. She remembered a conversation in which Raveena expressed unease about her landlord, describing him as overly inquisitive and oddly watchful. It wasn't enough to label him dangerous, but coupled with his false account, it began to look like more than a coincidence. Aarav started to see the outlines of two potential suspects, an obsessive ex-boyfriend and a landlord with unexplained motives. The deeper the investigation went, the more the case twisted into shadow. Phone tower data traced Raveena's last active signal not at her apartment, but several kilometers away, near a cluster of older residential buildings. The location puzzled police because it was far from her usual routes and contacts. If she had been intercepted before reaching home, it meant someone knew her routine well enough to anticipate her movements. As officers pieced together timelines, Aarav noticed how the story resisted clarity. Each lead opened into another layer of contradiction. Karthik's denial clashed with his persistent phone calls. Devraj's confident statement clashed with camera evidence. The rickshaw driver's testimony clashed with the phone signal. Instead of narrowing down the investigation, every step widened it. For Maya, the unease transformed into dread. She had once believed Raveena was cautious enough to avoid trouble. Now it seemed caution had not been enough. Someone close, someone familiar, had used that predictability to their advantage. By the end of the week, Inspector Aarav stood before a tangle of possibilities, none of them simple. Had Raveena fallen prey to the anger of a man who couldn't let her go, or had the very walls of her own building concealed a predator waiting for the right moment? The answers were not yet clear, but one thing was undeniable. The disappearance was no longer just a case of chance. It was deliberate, precise, and deeply personal. 3 days after the investigation began, Bengaluru woke to shocking news. A group of sanitation workers, clearing a clogged drainage canal on the outskirts of the city, stumbled upon something horrific. Tangled in weeds and debris was the body of a young woman. Her clothes were soaked, her face pale, her body bruised. When police arrived at the scene, they confirmed the worst fears. This was Raveena Solkar. The missing case had transformed into a murder investigation. The sight of her lifeless body sent ripples of fear through the community. For those who had followed her disappearance in headlines, the confirmation of death shattered lingering hope. Inspector Aarav Nandan was quick to secure the site, knowing that drainage water destroyed evidence quickly. Yet even in such conditions, crucial signs emerged. There were bruises across Raveena's arms and legs, but none consistent with drowning. Instead, the injuries suggested blunt force trauma. What was even more chilling was the revelation from the medical examiner. Raveena had traces of sedatives in her system. She had been drugged before she was killed. This discovery altered the direction of the case. If sedatives were used, it meant planning. It was not a crime of passion, not an impulsive act of rage. It was calculated, deliberate, and meant to ensure control over her. Someone had wanted to silence her completely, and had taken every measure to prevent resistance. Aarav realized the killer knew Raveena's habits, her routines, and her vulnerabilities. That level of knowledge pointed to someone close, not a stranger. As news spread, Bengaluru's tech corridors buzzed with fear. Women working late nights whispered about their safety. Neighbors checked their locks twice, and families questioned how safe the city truly was. Newspapers branded it the Bengaluru horror, while television debates questioned the security of women living alone in apartments. Raveena's death became more than a single tragedy. It became a mirror reflecting the hidden dangers of urban life. The autopsy also revealed something unexpected. The time of death suggested that Raveena had not been killed immediately after her disappearance. She had been alive for several hours, possibly even a day, before the final blow. This meant she had been held somewhere against her will. That fact sent a chill through the investigation team. If she had been alive after vanishing from CCTV, where had she been kept, and who had access to such a place? The first suspicion circled back to Karthik Veylan. His history with her, his obsessive calls, and his presence near her last known location made him an obvious suspect. Yet the precision of the crime raised doubt. Could Karthik, known for emotional outbursts, have orchestrated something this meticulous, or was there another hand guiding the plan? The idea of an accomplice or a completely different mastermind could not be ignored. Attention also returned to Devraj Khanna, the landlord. His false claim of seeing Raveena return now looked darker. If she had been held captive, a basement or locked room in her own building would have been an ideal place. Devraj's access to keys and knowledge of tenants' schedules gave him opportunities few others had. When Aarav ordered a search of his property, nothing conclusive was found immediately, but the seed of suspicion had already taken root. The discovery of Raveena's body deepened the urgency. This was no longer about finding a missing woman. It was about ensuring her killer didn't strike again. Aarav studied the evidence carefully. The sedation, the blunt force trauma, the disposal in a canal far from her home. The killer had hoped her body would never surface, that water and time would erase every trace. But fate had disrupted that plan, and now the smallest clue could unravel everything. For Maya, grief mixed with guilt. She replayed every memory, every warning sign her friend had shared. The uneasy phone calls, the strange way Raveena had spoken about her landlord, the sense of being watched. Each detail now carried the weight of hindsight. She wished she had insisted her friend file complaints, wished she had been more persistent, but it was too late. Raveena's life had ended violently, and the truth of why was still buried beneath lies and half-stories. The case that began as a vanishing now carried a grim certainty. Raveena had been targeted. Her killer had used planning, patience and knowledge of her life to execute the crime. For Inspector Aarav, the path ahead was clear. He needed to uncover not only who ended her life, but also what drove them to such darkness. And in that pursuit he knew the city itself was watching, waiting for answers to a horror that struck too close to home. The discovery of Raveena's body shifted the investigation into overdrive. Every move she had made in the final hours of her life was now under the microscope. Inspector Aarav Nandan pored over phone records, surveillance data and testimonies, determined to find the invisible thread connecting her disappearance to her death. The first breakthrough came from the telecom department. Raveena's phone, last switched on just before, on the night she went missing, had pinged near a narrow stretch of road that cut across older neighborhoods. The signal vanished shortly after, suggesting her phone had been switched off deliberately. For Aarav, this was the first clear sign of interception. She had never made it back to her apartment. Someone had stopped her on the way. Tracing her route through CCTV was difficult. Cameras in the area were scarce, and most private businesses either didn't maintain recordings or had poor quality feed. Yet one grainy clip from a grocery store provided a startling clue. Just minutes after Raveena left her office, a man resembling Karthik was seen on a motorbike, heading in the same direction. The timestamp matched perfectly with her last known movement. This wasn't proof of guilt, but it was enough to put him back into focus. Meanwhile, Maya shared crucial evidence with the police. She had saved several screenshots of threatening messages Karthik had sent Raveena weeks before. They were filled with anger, resentment, and veiled warnings that he would make her regret ending things with him. Combined with his phone being near her route that night, suspicion tightened around him. When confronted again, Karthik stuck to his denial, repeating that he hadn't seen her in weeks. His calmness, however, now looked less like innocence and more like a mask. Even as suspicion rose against Karthik, the contradictions with Devraj Khanna remained troubling. Why had he claimed to see her come home that night? His statement had already been disproved by CCTV footage, and now more inconsistencies began to emerge. During interviews with other tenants, some mentioned that Devraj often lingered in the corridors late at night. Others admitted they found him too curious about the daily routines of women living alone in the building. These weren't crimes, but they painted a picture of a man who paid more attention than he should. When Aarav ordered a deeper search of Devraj's property, the results unsettled even seasoned officers. In the basement of the building was a storage unit locked with a heavy chain. Inside were personal belongings, scarves, handbags and trinkets that did not belong to any current tenant. Among them, police found a scarf identical to one Raveena had been seen wearing in older photos. Forensic testing later confirmed traces of her DNA on it. This discovery pointed to something darker than coincidence. Devraj wasn't just a landlord with loose words. He was hiding things that connected directly to the victim. The theory began to take shape. If Karthik had intercepted Raveena, it was possible he hadn't acted alone. Perhaps he had help. Devraj, with access to the building and secluded spaces, could have provided the perfect hiding spot. The basement storage unit, hidden from tenants, was a chilling possibility for where Raveena might have been kept during the hours before her death. The combination of sedatives, bruising and delayed time of death supported this theory. She may have been held captive in a place no one thought to look, right under the noses of her neighbors. But the question remained, what bound these two men together? Was it chance that both emerged as suspects, or was there an undiscovered link between them? Aarav considered whether Karthik had promised Devraj money, or if they shared a darker alliance built on opportunity and exploitation. Whatever the case, Raveena's murder had layers of planning no longer explainable by a single angry ex-boyfriend. As investigators traced each piece of evidence, a disturbing pattern surfaced. Raveena's life had been invaded from two directions,
one by a man who couldn't let her go, and the other by a landlord who had used his position to observe, manipulate and hide. It was no longer a matter of who killed her but how far this partnership extended, and what drove them to collaborate. For the city, the case became a symbol of hidden dangers within ordinary walls. People who appeared harmless, people who lived next door, could become predators when darkness went unchecked. And for Inspector Aarav, the next step was clear. He had to uncover the hidden trap that had swallowed Raveena whole. Only then would the true picture of the Bengaluru horror begin to emerge. The forensic results from the basement storage unit marked a turning point in the investigation. With Raveena's DNA linking her directly to the space, Inspector Aarav Nandan was certain Devraj Khanna's role was far more sinister than he admitted. Under intense questioning, Devraj's carefully constructed calm began to fracture. What finally broke him was not the evidence alone, but the discovery of security footage from a nearby hardware store. Just days before Raveena disappeared, Devraj had purchased industrial-grade sedatives and a heavy chain lock, the same lock now found on his basement unit. Faced with irrefutable proof, he confessed, but the story he told revealed a darker truth than anyone expected. According to Devraj, the crime had not begun with him. It had started with Karthik. Karthik, consumed by jealousy and humiliation after being rejected, had approached Devraj with an offer. He promised him money if he would teach Raveena a lesson by ensuring she felt trapped and powerless. Devraj, who had long harbored an unhealthy fascination with the women living in his building, saw the opportunity to turn fantasy into reality. What began as Karthik's plan to intimidate Raveena quickly spiraled out of control once Devraj became involved. On the night of her disappearance, Karthik intercepted Raveena after she stepped out of the auto rickshaw, confronting her in a quiet stretch away from prying eyes. Witnesses had been correct about the rickshaw dropping her near her building, but she never made it inside. Instead, Karthik forced her toward the entrance, where Devraj was waiting with a spare key. The two men brought her into the basement storage unit. Sedatives ensured she could not resist. For hours, and possibly longer, she was held captive there, hidden in the very building she had called home. Devraj admitted that things escalated beyond what Karthik had intended. Karthik wanted control, a way to punish her emotionally, but Devraj took the situation further. In his words, the opportunity was too perfect to resist. The bruises on Raveena's body, the evidence of sedation, and the signs of prolonged captivity now all aligned with this confession. By the time Karthik returned to release her, it was already too late. Devraj had inflicted fatal injury. Together, panicked and desperate, they carried her body out of the building under cover of night and dumped it into the drainage canal, hoping the water would conceal their crime. The revelation shook the investigation team. It was not just a case of a jealous ex-boyfriend or a predatory landlord. It was a horrifying collaboration of obsession and greed. Two men from completely different walks of life had found a common purpose in destroying one woman's life. Aarav moved quickly, ensuring both were charged. Karthik was named the mastermind, who initiated the plan, while Devraj faced charges as the direct perpetrator of the murder. When the case reached the courts, the testimony left the city reeling. The details of how Raveena had been betrayed, not by strangers in the shadows but by men she knew or trusted, ignited outrage. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse demanding stricter laws for women's safety. Media coverage painted Raveena as more than a victim. She became a symbol of the vulnerability faced by thousands of women living alone in India's urban center. Every detail of her ordeal, the unwanted calls, the watchful eyes of her landlord, the failure of her warnings to be taken seriously, was dissected and turned into a grim warning for others. For Maya, sitting in the courtroom as the verdict was read, the grief was unbearable. She had lost her closest friend in the most brutal way, and no punishment could bring Raveena back. Yet she also understood the importance of what Raveena's case had become. Her story had forced a city to confront uncomfortable truths, to look more closely at the cracks in its security systems and its social fabric. When the judge sentenced Devraj to life imprisonment without parole and Karthik to 25 years for conspiracy and abetment, there was some measure of closure, but for many, including Maya, it was not enough. Raveena's story lingered like a scar across Bengaluru, a reminder of how easily danger could hide in plain sight. In the months that followed, housing societies across the city tightened their safety measures. Tenants demanded background checks on landlords, security cameras were upgraded, and women's helplines saw a surge in awareness campaigns. Raveena's death, though tragic, had become a wake-up call, a grim reminder that even in modern cities, shadows still lurked in familiar spaces. Her name became part of a conversation that could no longer be ignored, and her story continued to echo as both a warning and a call for change.